In this video, we're going to be looking at more ecosystem ecology, and what I have decided to do for this one is to review a lot of things that we covered yonder past. We covered all of the cycles, if you remember, the water, carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus cycles. And so we need to just refresh those. And so this is largely a review video. If you have good memory of those things, you could probably skip it. But if you don't, stick around. We'll talk quickly about them. So first is the water cycle. This is something that you've had since you were in probably second grade, but it does serve a couple of just things to point out here. How is water getting back into the ecosystem? There are several ways. We typically just want to limit these things to like evaporation, but notice this is also from transpiration from the land and evaporation not only from the land but also from the ocean. And so there's several ways that water can get back in, and honestly, just respiration. All of the living things on Earth breathing or exhaling water when they do so. And so that is also a source of water getting back into the atmosphere. And then water returns through precipitation and through runoff, as you can see here, in the groundwater, and also snow melt and that sort of thing. And so water can be stored in ice. So we note with our polar ice caps, though they are shrinking, they still do serve as a storage of water. So for the carbon cycle, a couple things to point out here. Carbon is removed from the air by photosynthesis, things like plants and bacteria and phytoplankton, and then they use this to make sugar for the environment. And then carbon dioxide is put back in by the other organisms that can't do photosynthesis through exhaling. But then you can see some other things that CO2 is put there by burning of fossil fuels, obviously through decomposition as well. And this is can be a major contributing factor to some the health in lakes, and if that CO2 is not able to be released because of algae cover or something like that, then CO2 can build up in the lakes and it not be good for the living things there. And so a big thing here, just remember that carbon is fixed by plants and made usable for other organisms, and then is returned constantly to the environment through several means. Nitrogen cycle is one of the more complicated ones, but the big thing here is that nitrogen is mostly found in the atmosphere in molecular nitrogen, or N2. It is not usable in this form, however. Even plants can't use it, so they need other somethings to fix it for them. And this is bacteria. There are nitrogen fixing bacteria. Nitrogen will get into the soil through precipitation, and then they will change that nitrogen to a couple of different compounds. It could be ammonia here, and then plants can use that, or it could be um, nitrate, which is also something that plants can use. You see these different pathways here. Decomposition returns the proteins found in organisms to ammonia as well. There are bacteria that like ammonia. There are bacteria that like nitrite. And so all these different stages can be used. We can't just go eat nitrates or something like that, so we typically have to take in plants or things that eat plants in order to get our nitrogen, in order to get our source of that. But nitrogen being a very important uh, element in making things like proteins, for instance. Remember, every amino acid has that ammonia on it, that amino group, and also DNA because of the nitrogenous basis. And so putting nitrogen into the ecosystem is very important. Most fertilizers or have nitrogen at their base because plants can't build unless they have a lot of nitrogen. And next is the phosphorus cycle. Phosphorus initially um, begins in rocks, and those rocks break down over time through weathering. Phosphorus is released in the soil. Some of it dissolves into the water through rain and so forth, and then plants can take that up, or different kinds of small things can take that up. Phosphorus is a very important part of molecules like DNA and RNA because of the phosphate group, and obviously then molecules like ATP, which has three phosphates. So you get the idea. When living things break down or decompose, then that phosphorus returns to soil, can be used by other things like plants, and so then that whole cycle continues. But phosphorus originates in rocks. And so I have harvesting here, but before we talk about harvesting, let me talk about just temperature effects of these cycling rates. Obviously, at high temperatures, faster recycling occurs. And so, in places that are constantly high temperature, decomposition happens rapidly, versus in a place that is very cold, decomposition happens very, very slowly. You read about them finding mummified people and things on tops of mountains. The reason is because those bodies do not decompose. Whereas in a rainforest, a dead animal or something is going to decompose very quickly because of the amount of energy there and the amount of temperature. And so this has a vast effect on an ecosystem. In the winter, in an area like this, really slow decomposition, whereas in the summer, it's happening very quickly. And if you've ever mowed a lawn or something like that, you can even kind of see this happening. Um, the reason I put harvesting on here is because harvesting and deforestation kind of in the same boat. What do they do in this system? So you think about like a field like this that has all these plants on it, and the whole idea behind nutrient cycling is the plant grows, reproduces, dies, adds itself back to the ecosystem. Well, harvesting means that all of those nutrients that were taken to build that plant are taken out of the ecosystem, thus slowly stripping away, or even quickly stripping away an ecosystem. You think about the amount of energy that's found in a tree. You cut a forest down, what do you have left? You have a bunch of ground that doesn't have very many nutrients in it. And so this is why fertilizers are used in agriculture, because the plants are taken out. They're not harvested. Obviously, we require harvesting in order to eat, so that's important. But there are other ways. Crop cycling is another thing, using plants that are able to kind of produce their own nitrogen, like legumes, and that's one benefit of that. And obviously, less consumption would be an answer to this as well.